Foreign Secretary, we understand the Americans have sent a private message to the Iranians. Were you aware of that, and do you know what it says?
Well, we sent a private message, in fact, a slightly more public message last week when I spoke to the Iranian foreign minister, and we're completely aligned with the Americans about what we say to the Iranians, and it is basically that they are supporting these proxies in the region, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas or the Houthis, and they have got to be absolutely clear with them that what is happening in the Red Sea is unacceptable. And we've demonstrated very clearly that we back our words, our warnings, with action when it is necessary.
I don't imagine he said, yes, Lord Cameron, I'll go and do that now. What was his response?
Well, it was, as you can imagine, with the British Foreign Secretary and an Iranian Foreign Minister, it was a spirited and lively exchange. But what I wanted to absolutely... Getting onto this diplomacy thing. But no, what I wanted to be absolutely clear about was that what was happening was unacceptable, that military action should always be the last resort. But since the 19th of November, we have had 26 attacks on ships. Freedom of navigation really matters. It's not just the goods that are coming to this country, the dangers of our economy being dislocated. It's also, grain ships on their way to Ethiopia and Sudan to feed some of the poorest and hungriest people in the world. This really matters. Yeah. And what was happening was unacceptable.
You said this morning that the UK is ready for more strikes. Is this an open-ended commitment?
No, what I've said is that we have sent the clearest possible message to the Houthis that their behaviour is unacceptable. And we've demonstrated that we're prepared to follow words and warnings with action. And that is incredibly important that they understand that.
The leader of our NATO ally, Turkey, says that the action is disproportionate. Now, what are you going to do if you want to take further action and the Turks say, no, no, no?
Well, we don't agree with what President Erdogan has said. If you look at the action we've taken, it's actually backed by a very wide coalition of countries. They're obviously...
But he's our ally.
Yes, of course. He's an important NATO ally, but in this case, we don't agree. We see this as completely separate from the Israel-Gaza conflict. I mean, what is happening in the Red Sea? 26 attacks, and of course they were getting more severe. I mean, one of the final attacks, which was involving HMS Diamond, our own destroyer, there were over 20 drones and missiles attacking that ship. And so, it's unacceptable. We have to act. There's a very large number of allies that agree with that. And, of course, it's not just Britain and America in the military chain, as it were. There's also the Dutch, the Canadians, the Australians and others, the Bahrainis in that chain.
Is it really realistic to say this has nothing to do with Israel-Gaza? You might say the Houthis are playing games and so on, but shouldn't you really be focusing on achieving something that looks like a sustainable ceasefire there, which would mean the Houthis would have no reason to do what they're doing?
Well, we are doing that at the same time. In fact, we've been doing that from the get-go. So, first of all, on the aid that needs to go into Gaza, this week I've taken a number of steps to talk to the Israelis about opening more crossings, about allowing aid into the Ashdod port in Israel. At the moment, we've got something like 150 trucks of aid going into Gaza every day. We need to get to something like more 500 trucks a day. So that is absolutely the focus of the British government, and also trying to get to a sustainable ceasefire.
But my point is, as long as that's going on, whatever you think about what the Houthis are saying, whether it's real or not, you're giving them legitimacy for saying that this is about Israel and Gaza.
Well, of course, they will say what they want to say. Actually, the Yemeni government doesn't agree with that. But you can turn it around the other way and say, well, what are the consequences of not acting? I mean, since the 19th of November, we've endured almost 2 months of continual attacks, and we gave warning after warning. And frankly, ultimately, that wasn't working. The number of attacks was going up. The severity of those attacks was going up. So, not acting is also a policy, and it was a policy that wasn't working, and that's why it's necessary to act.
All right,
But if you're asking me, do we also need to, bring peace to the situation in Gaza and get a sustainable ceasefire? Yes, absolutely. And do we need to get aid in? Yes, we do.
I want to come back to that, but let's just talk about the background to this. Your colleague Grant Shapps said, he was very direct, he told the Iranians, we see you, we see through what you're doing. In your view, is the real enemy here Iran?
Well, there's no doubt that the malign actor in the region who is behind these proxy groups is Iran. Iran backs Hamas, they back Hezbollah, they back the Houthis, they provide them with weapons. They also back armed groups that are acting within Iraq and attacking British and American bases and troops. So we know what they're doing. We know what they're doing is wrong. We call them out for it, and we're very clear about that.
Has it occurred to you, or let me put it this way, have you considered the risk that this action, whatever it does out there, raises the likelihood of terrorist action here at home? Are you planning to raise the threat level?
Well, the threat level is set after careful consideration by the Joint Terrorism Assessment Centre, and that's the right way of doing it. It's not in the power of politicians just to suddenly wake up one morning and decide to change the threat level. But our view is, look, take a step back from this. I mean, it's hard to think of a time when there's been so much danger and insecurity and instability in the world. The lights are absolutely flashing red, as it were, on the global dashboard. And what we need at that time is strong leadership and a clear plan. That's what we have with the Prime Minister and the team in place.
But my point is...
taking action, you know, if you don't act against the Houthis in the Red Sea, you're going to see more attacks. They are effectively terroristic attacks. You'll see more of that.
My point is that by your action, you're raising the risk or the danger to people in this country. Was that part of your consideration in making this decision?
We consider all of those things. I mean, obviously, it's interesting coming back as a former Prime Minister and sitting in those Cobra meetings and cabinet meetings and watching the Prime Minister. He is absolutely meticulous and careful at considering every question. Is there an alternative? Have we exhausted all the other possibilities? Is this the right action to take with our allies? What will be the reaction in the region? What are the effects back at home? I mean, it's incredibly impressive to watch someone with that attention to detail, with that care and caution, but also ultimately the strength to take what I believe is the right decision, which is to act. Of course, you can always say the Americans can do this on their own, but frankly, if you have the capability to help, and if you share with them the analysis that this needs to stop, it's right to step forward and act. And that's not Britain being sort of grandiloquent or anything. We are a country whose national interest is deeply affected by this.
Let's talk about the impact of your own experience sitting in that prime ministerial seat. Back in 2013, you sought the backing of the House of Commons for an attack on Syria, and you thought... You said in your memoirs you had Ed Miliband's support, but in fact Labour voted against you. You lost the vote, and as a consequence, the Americans dropped plans for military actions. Now, when he stood for elections Labour leader, Keir Starmer promised that he'd never support military action. Says he does this morning. Are you sure you can count on his backing?
Well, he's been clear. I was not in the briefing that he received, but I've heard what he said publicly, that he backs the action that's been taken, and I think it's right to do that. In terms of Parliament, there will be a statement in Parliament on Monday. There'll be opportunity for parliamentary colleagues in both houses to raise questions and to ask about this, and I think that's right. And what I would say about what the Prime Minister's done is he's followed every process correctly about bringing colleagues together, listening to military advice, taking legal advice, and then making a statement. So on this issue, should we have had a vote in advance? I don't think.
But I think what I'm really asking about is the effect of your own experience here. In your memoirs, you write that you were deeply affected by the West's failure in the Balkans and Rwanda, and that in Syria, the Western world hadn't done enough to back the good guys. And is there a sense here that you might be overcorrecting for past mistakes?
No, I don't. I absolutely don't think that. I think you have to look at each situation on its merits. I had occasions in office where, as you say, on Syria, we didn't go ahead with the action after the chemical weapons. I think that was a mistake, but nonetheless, there we are. We had occasions, for instance, in the campaign against ISIS and the ISIL state, effectively, in Iraq and Syria, where we did go ahead with others, and where that was very effective, and ISIL no longer has a state. So I think, you take each occasion on its merits, but crucially, there is a different Prime Minister in place, someone who looks at these things incredibly carefully. He doesn't come at it with any preconceived notions, but I could profoundly see someone who was making the right decision in the right way.
All right, a couple of quick questions about related but separate issues. This week you suggested to the parliamentary committee that Israel might be guilty of war crimes.
I didn't say that.
Well, OK, let me ask you this way then. Do you agree with the South Africans that Israel has a case to answer before the International Court of Justice?
No, I absolutely don't. I think the South African action is wrong. I think it's unhelpful. I think it shouldn't be happening. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but they are talking here about genocide. They're taking this case on the basis of genocide. And, to prove that, you've got to prove that there was intent. Now, I take the view that Israel is acting in self-defence after the appalling attack on the 7th of October. But even if you take a different view to my view, to look at Israel, a democracy, a country with the rule of law, a country with armed forces that are committed to obeying the rule of law, to say that they have, that country, that leadership, that armed forces, that they have the intent to commit genocide, I think that is nonsense. I think that's wrong.
But you can't know that. You can only judge on the basis of what they've done.
Yeah, you can judge. You can judge, though, on the basis of what they have done and how they've acted and why they're acting. And to say there's an intent to commit genocide, I do believe that's wrong.
All right. Last night, new president in Taiwan, described by the Chinese Communist Party as a troublemaker. Do you think this brings a Chinese intervention in Taiwan any closer?
Well, first of all, we should congratulate the Taiwanese for carrying out another set of elections. They've got a vibrant and lively and effective democracy, and also congratulate the winner, the president. And in terms of what happens next, look, we, don't want to see any unilateral change in the arrangements across the Taiwan state. We don't believe in the use of force in any way in this situation. And we wish the new president well. All
right, look, let's talk about some domestic issues. Big moment this week, apparently. No small boat landings for a month, though they actually resumed yesterday. You are the first to say net immigration numbers should fall below 100,000. This year, irrespective of the small boats, the figure is over 500,000. I think that the young people now would call that an epic fail.
I think, first of all, we've got to separate the legal from the illegal. On the legal migration, we have had some quite big changes. Quite rightly, we've taken a lot of people from Ukraine. I actually hosted a family of my own at home. We've had, obviously, the Hong Kong Chinese with the British passport holders. They've come over. And also, you've had all the effects of
way north of 100,000. Come on.
Well, of course it is. And the Prime Minister set out, and the Home Secretary set out very clear rules
for...
Well, they've set out very, very big and clear changes to bring down legal migration. I mean, crucially, what matters is it's a three-sided coin, this. You've got immigration policy, you've also got your education policy and your welfare policy. You've got to make sure you're training British people for the jobs that are being made available, and you've got to have a welfare policy that means that people out of work look at the chance of work. Now, the government's got all of those things in place.
I get all of that, but almost everything you've tried has resulted, rather than a drop, but an increase, hasn't it?
Well, you've seen big changes on the legal side. On the illegal side, I strongly support what the government's doing, and I see this all across the world. Wide-scale, very visible, illegal immigration is so destructive to trust in a country and a country's immigration system, and that's why, crucially, next week, the Rwanda bill will go ahead, and quite right too.
Another hangover from your time in charge is the persecution of post office sub-postmasters. Your Chancellor, George Osborne, said that he was completely unaware of what was taking place. Now, James Arbuthnot, who was then an MP, the MP who led the campaign on this, says he wrote to every member of Parliament, which would include you and Osborne. How could you not know what's going on?
Well, first of all...
How is that possible?
Well, the most important thing is there is a public inquiry underway, and that public inquiry can look at every piece of paper that is sent to every MP and every minister. So I think let's make sure that happens. But even before that, quite rightly, the Prime Minister acted very decisively last week with this new law that will be passed to pay the compensation.
You're dealing with the question I've asked you. How could you guys not know?
Well, all I can say is I don't recall in any detail being briefed and being aware of the scale of this issue. But that's what the public inquiry is for. They must be able to. They must look at all the advice ministers received and all the action that was taken.
No, I'll go further. It's about you.
Yes.
Is there no part of you that is saying to yourself now that you, or Osborne, or Ed Davey could have acted at some point to avert what is a scandal, but actually it's
I'd
worse,
go,
a human tragedy.
I'd go further than that. I mean, first of all, this is an appalling miscarriage of justice. And anyone who's been involved in government in any way over the last 20 years has got to be extremely sorry, as I am, about what has happened and how these people
So
have
you
been
feel
treated.
some responsibility?
No, I think everyone in government has got who's been involved. This goes back before my time in office, when these original things were signed. And we've got to get to the bottom of it. And that's what, that's what public inquiries do. They can look at what were ministers told, what information was put in front of them, what did they decide. And because it's hard to remember every letter and piece of paper put in front of you. I don't recall being briefed about it in any detail, but let's let this public inquiry do its work.
OK, I'm not asking you this as a technical question, but just as a parliamentarian, as a person. Do you feel the post office bosses who did know for certain should face criminal charges?
Well, if anyone has broken the law, they should face criminal charges. And we've got to get to the bottom of who is responsible for what and who should be accountable. And if it involves law-breaking, then we have an independent judicial system in this country. But if people have broken the law, they should face the consequences.
All right, last question for you really, in a way. You've always said that you entered politics because you'd been fortunate in your life and you felt some duty to serve. If your party said to you, David, we need you back in the House of Commons, we've got your seat, what would you go home and say to your wife, Sam?
That's not going to happen, so I don't have to. I have enough difficult conversations.
Well, of course, it's entirely possible. Alec Douglas-Hume came back as Foreign Secretary.
I was delighted to be asked by Rishi Sunak, someone I admire greatly. I believe in public service. This is a time where we've got huge amounts of uncertainty and danger and difficulty in the world, and the ability to come back and try and serve in some capacity as Foreign Secretary is a huge honour for me. I'm going to do my best, use the experience I've got, but there's no other agenda here.
But it's not about another agenda, it's about you and duty. Threat to your party is Nigel Farage, Reform Party, now polling above 10%, taking a huge bite out of your numbers. Surely you would do anything in your power to stop the fruitcakes and loonies torpedoing the Conservative Party.
I'm doing the job I was asked to do. I'm delighted to do it. I'm not after any other role.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much.
My pleasure.